The children abandoned their mother for convenience. What happened when she left is shocking. Marina sat in her old armchair, holding back tears, but unable to take away the pain that filled her heart. Outside the window, in the very yard where the children once played, yellow leaves rustled, exhorting her that everything she loved was fading away, as autumn takes away summer. Time had taken her strength, but not her memories. Every corner of this house was familiar, every object held a piece of her life. The house she had built with love and care now seemed alien. The walls that had once been full of laughter and joy now looked at her with cold eyes. The bustling children's room where she had spent hours collecting toys was now an empty space that left little trace of the past. Everything that was important could now be easily destroyed, sold, forgotten. Marina looked around the room, her eyes moving slowly from the old photographs hanging on the walls to the things she held in her hands. Knitted plaids, old books, albums with family photos. It was all her world, her life. But then the phone rang, and it was Sophia on the other end of the line. "Mom, we need to talk," her daughter said, her voice cold, emotionless. "We've decided to sell the house. You need to think about moving into a nursing home. It's better for all of us." Her daughter's words hung in the air like a heavy burden that Marina couldn't shake off. Sell the house. Nursing home, these words tore at her like the point of a knife. How could this be possible? This house had been her life. It was where she had raised her children, spent decades spent caring and loving. This house held her memories, her joys and her sorrows. And now it's being taken from her. "Sophia, you realize this is all for me, don't you? This house, this stuff. It's not just junk, it's my life. I can't just part with it," Marina said, her voice trembling with emotion. But Sophia didn't feel pity. Her words were firm and direct. "Mom, Maxim and I have discussed this. We both understand that it's hard for you, but you realize yourself that the apartment is too small to leave you here. And you're getting old. It's the most sensible solution. Maxim and I can't drag it out any longer either." Marina was silent. She realized that she had become a burden to the children, that their lives went on without her. "Sophia and Maxim, my children." She mentally repeated those words, but a very different music was playing in her head. They were no longer the children who called her into the kitchen at night for advice, or cooked dinner with her. To them she had become just a part of this house, not an important person. Marina glanced at the old sewing machine in the corner of the room. It was a gift from her late husband, the only trace of him left. A memory flashed, how he had taught her to sew, how the two of them had sat together, choosing fabric for new dresses. That machine was connected to him, to the time when they had built their life together. But none of that mattered now. One of the men who came to appraise the property pointed to the sewing machine. "You could scrap this thing. It no longer works, and repair is pointless," he said with ease, as if we were talking about some garbage. Marina could not bear it. Her hands clenched into fists. "No, you won't touch this," she said firmly, almost defiantly. The man shrugged his shoulders, and Sophia, standing next to her, rolled her eyes. "Mom, why are you getting so stale with this? You don't need it, and you're not using it," Sophia said, feeling irritated. "You can't take it to a new apartment. It was a gift from your father. It's all I have left of him," Marina replied with pain in her voice. But Sophia remained silent. She did not want to argue. Her eyes reflected only displeasure. Time passed, and Marina felt how everything that was dear to her, with each passing day, is going away. Everything in this house was becoming a stranger. A few days later, when everything had been dismantled, when the old house was filled with strangers discussing what to keep and what to sell, Marina found herself alone in an empty room. Everything was set out, everything was packed. She stood up, walked around the house looking for one last glimpse. Everything had become alien, everything was gone. All that was left was this cold, empty house. That evening, when she had to leave the house, Marina stood on the porch and looked at the building that had been her fortress. She couldn't say goodbye because it hurt too much. Everything she had once built and furnished seemed unnecessary to her now. She was leaving, but her soul was still here. And despite all those words, her heart was heavy. Marina got into the car and sighed quietly. It was her last glimpse of her home, the place where she had spent the best and worst years of her life. She had always considered it her refuge, a fortress to which she would return in any storm. But now that house was disappearing, dissolving into the rearview mirror like something unwanted, swept away by time. Sophia sat in the front seat, her face tense and her eyes focused on the road. Maxim was driving, concentrating on the road, occasionally glancing at his mother through the rearview mirror. He was silent, His thoughts were somewhere far away, not touching what was happening now. Marina couldn't say anything. All she felt was like an invisible heaviness filling her chest. She didn't know what it was that scared her the most. The fact that her home would now be a stranger, or that she herself was becoming a stranger to her children. They had made their decision, and now there seemed to be no turning back. There was a heavy silence in the car. "Why should I feel like this?" thought Marina, barely holding back tears. "Why don't they say anything more to me? I'm a mother after all. Don't I deserve at least a little understanding?" But her questions remained unanswered. It was as if Sophia and Maxim were trying to hide from her, as if their conscience wouldn't let them look her in the eye. Driving through familiar streets, Marina couldn't help but notice how everything had changed. Where before there were old houses with peeling paint, now there were new, modern buildings similar to each other. Along the road appeared stores with brightly colored signs, and lively people hurried to go about their business. But to Marina, these people were strangers, and these buildings were not her world. She had once walked these streets with her children when they were small. When they played in the sandbox, ran around the yard, when every corner of this neighborhood was filled with laughter and joy. And now, looking at it all, she couldn't shake the feeling that her world was gone. It had dissolved, like that old paint on the houses, like leaves carried away by the wind. How could everything have changed so quickly? Marina asked herself, looking around again and again at the neighborhood that now seemed foreign to her. She couldn't help but remember how it had all started here, with these streets, these houses. This was where she had made her way, and now her place was somewhere far away from these familiar places. It was hot in the car, and Marina opened the window to get some air. The realization that she wouldn't be coming back here again increasingly enveloped her. Time was taking her farther and farther away from what she knew was close to her with every kilometer. Every next movement of the car, and she was leaving her home, her world. "I'm in this car, but not in this world," Marina thought, watching cities and fields pass by outside the windows. Everything she had left behind was no longer hers. She did not know what awaited her in the new place, and her soul was gripped by fear. Not fear of the new, but fear that she might not find her place in this alien world. Maxim broke the silence with a brief glance at his mother. "We'll be home soon, Mom. Everything will be all right," he said, but there was more alienation than comfort in his voice. Marina nodded silently, though she didn't believe his words. "Home? What home? It's all foreign, not mine. I feel nothing here that could be my new beginning." She had to look at them more than once along the way, at her children who sat next to her but were so far away. Sophia absorbed in phone calls, Maxim in thoughts of how to get to the end of the road faster. None of them said a word to support her, or at least show interest in her worries. Marina realized her place in their lives had disappeared. She had become invisible. Of what had been her life, only a few things in her suitcase remained. She realized that for Sophia and Maxim her existence was not important, and perhaps even became a burden. They were minding their own business, building their own lives. And she was just a mother to them, which now became alien, inconvenient, unnecessary. Marina looked around, trying to remember every detail of the old neighborhood that now seemed so empty. She tried to cling to whatever was left, but the feelings were fading away, dissolving into space, like that fall that can't hold its leaves. The car moved farther and farther away, and Marina felt her world going away. The new world that was opening before her seemed unfamiliar and cold, and with every kilometer she was losing pieces of her old life. The car turned into a new avenue, and before Marina's eyes flashed everything that was dear to her. That glance in the rearview mirror was the last glimpse of her old world. When Marina entered Sophia's house, her heart squeezed. It was a huge, modern house with high ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows that seemed not only to let in light, but also to absorb all the heat. The spacious rooms with minimalist design left no room for coziness. The clean lines and empty spaces didn't evoke a sense of homely warmth in her. There was no smell of home-cooked food here, no sounds that warmed her soul. This house was cold and impersonal. Sophia led her to a room on the second floor, not really explaining what and how, just pointing to the door. "This is where you'll live," she said, not pausing to wait for a reaction. "There's plenty of room, don't worry." Marina stopped in the doorway and looked around the room. The furniture was new and modern looking, but everything seemed foreign. A sleeping bed with a soft headboard, neatly arranged pillows, a table with a minimalist lamp, and a few empty shelves that were clearly not meant for personal belongings. The window looked out onto the street, but all that was visible from it was the boring cityscape, asphalt, cars, and the facades of other houses. From somewhere below came the noise of city life. But it was not the noise she was used to hearing in her home, where it was quiet, only occasionally interrupted by the tinkling laughter of children. She placed her suitcase on the bed and walked over to a shelf that was unlikely to ever be filled with anything meaningful to her. There was not a single photograph, not a single book that could give her a sense of home. Sophia stood at the door, peering at her with slight displeasure. "Mom, don't go through things, please. We've talked about this. No old pictures, no unnecessary items. I don't want it to be like an old house," she said with feigned ease. Marina turned and looked at her daughter, trying to find some understanding in her face. Sophia was focused on something of her own, and her words left no room for argument. This was her home, her life. She didn't want to clutter the space with her mother's memories. "I understand," Marina said quietly, though a chill echoed in her soul. "I don't want to be superfluous, Sophia." But Sophia, without waiting for the continuation, quickly left the room, leaving Maria alone. As the door slammed behind her daughter, Marina felt her loneliness becoming even more apparent. She looked around the shelves, which were devoid of any pictures of her family. All she was left with was a couple books on the shelf, books that Sophia may have bought for interior decoration, but not for reading. The pictures of her children smiling, of her husband, were gone. It had all become unnecessary, like herself. Marina didn't belong in this house. It didn't have the coziness that had filled her old apartment, where every corner was imbued with memories, where everything told its own story. Here everything was new, perfectly built, but devoid of soul. And this new space, this empty interior, became her prison. After a while, Sophia returned, but with new demands. "Mom, you've done too much again," she said, noticing how Marina arranged her old photos on the nightstand. "You promised yourself that you wouldn't fill the room with all this junk. We don't have enough space as it is." Marina silently put the photos into the drawer, realizing that her attempts to regain some sense of home were futile. She looked at Sophia, who had already started to cook something in the kitchen, and again felt the weight of loneliness. There was no warmth in her eyes, no care that had been evident before. When Sophia left, Marina went to the window and looked at the street for a long time. Cars drove by, people hurried about their business, and she couldn't help but notice how her life had changed. Now she was part of this cold and noisy world, but she didn't feel part of it. "Everything I had is gone now," Marina whispered under her breath, feeling tears coming to her eyes. But she held back. She couldn't allow herself to be weak. The new walls did not give her peace, but on the contrary, made her feel even more lonely. She remembered the years when the children were small, when her old house was filled with laughter, with noise, when she could be near those she loved. But now, with each passing day, she was becoming more alien. To Sophia, she was just an obligatory part to be done with. And Maxim stayed more and more in his own world, not noticing that his mother was already here, next to him, and not in her old house. Every day Marina felt her old world fading away, leaving only emptiness. Marina sat in her new place, in Sophia's house, and felt the coldness growing every day. She had long been accustomed to the silence and emptiness of this room, but now it was not just empty, it was devoid of life itself. Her gaze drifted to the window, where the familiar, but foreign, streets glimmered beyond it. She still couldn't get used to this cold, faceless environment. As the weeks passed, her relationship with the children became increasingly strained. Sophia and Maxim began to avoid her, their conversations reduced to brief phrases, and their eyes avoided her gaze. They tried to be polite, but Marina could feel an insurmountable wall growing between them. It was hard to breathe in the room, and each day brought new desperate attempts at contact that were immediately shattered by the wall of their invisible estrangement. One evening, as Marina sat at dinner, Sophia suddenly brought up a topic that overshadowed everything else. "Mom, Maxim and I thought it would be better if you thought about a nursing home. We've already found a couple of places where you can get care," she said without looking at her mother. The tone was neutral, but there was a tiredness in it. Sophia spoke of it as if it were inevitable, as if it were a decision that didn't need to be discussed. These words were a thunderclap for Marina. She felt her heart clench with pain. A nursing home was the kind of place she never wanted to imagine. She had always thought that her children would be there for her, that they would take care of her in her old age. But now, hearing those words, she realized that to them she had become nothing but a burden. In their eyes, she was no longer the mother who raised them, supported them, and did everything for them. She was a problem to be solved. "Do you want me to go there?" Marina said, her voice low, almost unintelligible. The words came through with difficulty, as if she was trying to regain some dignity. Sophia, without raising her head, replied in passing. We don't want you to suffer, Mother. It's just that Maxim and I realize that you'll be better off there. We have no other options. Marina felt something inside her shatter. The pain that had been eating away at her soul for a long time now became unbearable. She couldn't believe that her children, the ones she had raised, now wanted to get rid of her. It wasn't just physical distance. It was an alienation that penetrated to the very depths of her soul. They spoke to her as if she were an outsider who should just be put on the shelf out of the way. So that's how it works, she whispered. I'm just going to be a burden to you. For so many years I've lived for you, and now, you want to send me to a nursing home? Sophia paused, and there was a flicker of confusion in her eyes, but it quickly disappeared. Mom, you realize we don't have any other options. We both work, we have families of our own. You need a place where you can get help. Maxim and I are doing everything we can to make your life easier. Her words didn't sound like comfort, but like an excuse. Marina was silent. Her soul was filled with emptiness. Her life, everything she had built, seemed to have been destroyed. The children she had raised were now becoming the ones who couldn't understand her needs. They only saw her as a problem to be solved, and no emotional connection, no real conversations about how she felt. Maxim, sitting in the corner, watched this silently. He didn't interfere, didn't try to defend her. He didn't say a word in her defense. He was part of what was happening, but in that moment Marina realized that his silence was not indifference. It was his way of avoiding responsibility. He didn't want to be the one to decide what to do with his mother. He, like Sophia, wanted this to be over as quickly as possible. After dinner, when Sophia left for the kitchen, Maxim didn't say anything either. He only walked quickly over to Marina and, without the slightest expression on his face, said, Mom, I understand that it's hard for you, but we can't leave you here. Sophia and I have talked, and this is the right decision. Believe me, you'll understand. Marina turned to her son, but in her eyes there was no anger or resentment. There was only despair. Understand? I do understand. I understand that for you I have become superfluous, that everything I have done is worthless. You want to get rid of me, and that's okay. You don't need me. Maxim was silent, trying to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. He couldn't believe his mother was saying that, but he didn't know how to undo anything that had been said. That night Marina couldn't sleep for a long time. She lay in her new room, quietly listening to the footsteps pass in the house. The silence was so great that she could feel her own heart beating in unison with hers. She couldn't escape the thought that her children no longer needed her. She wasn't just superfluous. She was forgotten. Marina could not find peace. Every day spent in Sophia's house filled her soul with more and more longing. She felt her place in the children's lives finally disappearing. Sophia and Maxim were busy with their own lives, and her presence was becoming more and more uncomfortable for them. She was just a burden that had to be dealt with somehow, but neither Sophia nor Maxim tried to understand her soul. One day, as Marina sat alone in her new, alien home, the phone rang. A familiar name popped up on the phone screen, Olga, her old neighbor. Once upon a time, she and Olga had spent a lot of time together, talking about life, worries, and Marina felt that Olga was always there for her, in her world, full of worries and concerns. And now, in this moment of despair, Olga was there again. Hello, Marina. How are you? There was genuine concern in Olga's voice. I was thinking, why don't you move to my village? You know how much I love you. I could help you get settled. We'll all live quietly there, and you'll get a little break from all this. And maybe find a new meaning in life. Marina was silent. Those words, so simple and unexpected, filled her heart with a warm but bitter feeling. It was an offer she could not refuse. Life in the countryside. She had always dreamed of it, but had never dared to even think of moving there. Now this thought was not just an opportunity, but a real chance for a new start. Olga, do you really want me to come? Marina asked, not believing her ears. Of course. You're my friend, and I care. You know how hard it is to be in a foreign land. Come on, I'll arrange everything. Come and everything will be fine, I promise. Marina felt her soul fill with light. Olga, her old neighbor, became for her the person who was ready to pull her out of this hell of loneliness and alienation. She felt the strength building up inside her. Perhaps she really could start from scratch. Marina spent the next few days preparing for the move. Olga helped her to organize transportation, to solve issues with things. Everything went smoothly, and Marina began to believe in a new chance at life. She packed her things, which now seemed too heavy and unnecessary but still important. She couldn't get rid of old photos and a few personal items that were connected to the most important moments in her life. When the day of the move came, Marina was already feeling determined. Olga welcomed her to the village with open arms, as if she had come home. The village, with its quiet streets and green expanses, seemed to Marina a comfort, a place where she could find the lost meaning of life. "You'll be at home here," Olga said, helping Marina unload her things. "You and I will also cultivate flower beds, and in the vegetable garden we'll plant something. It's quiet in nature, look how good it is." Marina could not help but notice how her heart was filled with a new sense of peace, which she had been looking for so long. Everything was quiet and peaceful in this place, as if nature itself was taking her into its arms. There was no noise of the city here, no nervousness that had haunted her for the past months. She was surrounded by greenery, fresh air that seemed like a real medicine for her soul. Olga settled Maria in a small house on the outskirts of the village, where they had once often met, socialized. The house was old but cozy. Marina immediately felt that this place could be her new home. It didn't have that metallic coldness like Sophia's house. It was warm and peaceful. "You can't imagine how much I like it here," Marina said as she looked around the room she was going to live in. "Everything is so homely." Olga grinned, unwrapping a new blanket. "You and I are going to work here again. It's going to be beautiful. And most importantly, you won't be alone. I'll be there for you." Marina felt the light in her heart, which had not been for a long time. She was no longer abandoned and unwanted. She was here, in this place, surrounded by people who cared for her. The village had become a refuge where she could forget all her pains and worries. The silence, the sounds of nature, the green expanses, all this filled her soul with the calmness she had been missing. In the following weeks, Marina began to settle into her new home. Olga helped her, but despite its simplicity, life in the village made Marina feel like she had found meaning again. She began to feel that she had something to do. Her life was beginning to take shape again. Every day Marina felt more and more like she was opening up to this new world. Alia was her support, her backbone, a person with whom she could talk about real feelings, not about what needed to be done for the convenience of others. In this house, among nature, Marina finally felt that her life was not over, and that she had the right to happiness, even if it was new, unexpected, and far from what she had imagined before. It had been several months since Marina had moved to the village. She had already gotten used to the silence that reigned around her, and to the quiet passage of time, which seemed completely alien to the rhythm of life in the city. The morning began with birdsong and the smell of fresh hay, not with the shouting of the alarm clock and the noise of passing cars. Instead of city smog and bustle, clean air that filled her lungs. Marina slowly but surely organized her new home. All the furniture was old, not particularly beautiful, but it was her own. It was her home, and it was beginning to be filled with the coziness she had been looking for so long. Together with Olga, she had made a few simple but cozy changes. The old chairs had been reupholstered with a new bedspread, and there was a small library in the corner with the books she had brought with her. This place became her sanctuary, a place where she felt needed and safe. Her neighbors were Alexander and Valentina, a family Marina had met right after she moved in. They lived in a house nearby, and Valentina, as soon as she learned that Marina had moved to the village, offered to help her. She, like Olga, was a kind woman, always ready to support, help, and soon they became close friends. Their meetings were not limited to general business or to talking about gardening issues. She and Valentina often sat over a cup of tea, discussing not only gardening worries, but also the simple joys of life. Alexander was more reserved, but also genuinely interested in helping Marina adapt. He became her support in some practical matters, helped with household chores, for example, fixing the fence or cleaning the garden. Marina felt safe with him, although she could not help noticing that his masculine restraint often concealed genuine concern. He was like many of the men in the village, taciturn but reliable. As time passed, Marina began to feel her life in the village filling up with real, vibrant relationships. She no longer felt lonely. She had Olga, she had Valentina and Alexander, new people who gave her something she hadn't had in her life for the last few years, the feeling that someone really needed her. In every gesture, in every word they spoke, there was genuine care and attention. There were none of the unspoken words and resentments she had experienced with her children. Here she wasn't seen as a burden. Here she was important. Together with Olga and Valentina, she started working on the plot, tending the vegetable garden and planting flowers. Olga even suggested that they plant a couple of apple trees together, so that Marina would have her own little apple tree to enjoy every year. These little cares filled her heart with warmth, and she realized how much she missed the simple joys. "Do you see how the apple trees are growing?" Olga said, proud of what she and Marina had grown together. "In a couple of years there will be fruit. And then you will realize that your life is now in your hands, that you can control everything again." Marina smiled, feeling her soul fill with light. Here, in the midst of this simple life, she felt she was truly living again. She didn't just exist waiting for the children to call or come. Here, in the village, she was herself. This was her home, her life, and no one could take that feeling away from her. From time to time, however, she still remembered her children. Sometimes, standing at the window and looking out over the vegetable garden, she remembered how they ran around as children, how they laughed. She remembered them when they were small, and she was everything to them: support, protection, a source of warmth. But as time went on, those memories became more and more distant. She wasn't angry, she wasn't resentful. She just realized that their lives were going their own way, and that she could no longer be a part of that life as she had been. One evening, when she and Olga were sitting in the garden, Marina confessed for the first time what had been tormenting her all this time. "You know, Olga, sometimes I think about my children. They were everything to me. But now that I'm here in this house with you, I realize that I can't go back there anymore. I can't be a part of their lives again if they don't want me around." Olga listened to her in silence, and then, as always, she smiled and put her hand on her shoulder. "You know, Marina, we have each other, and we won't let you be alone. You're not alone anymore." Marina couldn't hold back the tears that came to her eyes. She hadn't expected such support. It was more than she could have wished for. Here in the village, she was not a stranger, not abandoned. Here she was loved, and she felt that love in every day. She no longer sought the approval of her children. Here, in this place, she had found her world, her place where she was important. She wasn't going to reach out to her children anymore. She wasn't waiting for calls or visits. This was her life, and she accepted it for what it was. Marina decided not to hold any grudges or hopes. She was ready to move on and look forward to the future with hope. Every day she became more and more confident in her new path. Rural life, new relationships, and the care of those around her made her feel alive again. And she realized that her new beginning was just beginning.